And welcome to this week's Mailbox. And as I was going through the comments for this week, couldn't help noticing there's a lot of ones that I tend not to bring into these mailboxes. First of all, ones talking about, Battle for Azeroth. Sometimes gameplay issues, which is fine to talk about, but sometimes story issues, which of course comes into the realm of spoilers. I don't like to talk about spoilers in here. I'm not going to today, by the way. And the other thing which I found really enjoyable is I was looking through some things, and there were some comments that really prompted a discussion between multiple people. I'm not talking about ones where I was also responding as well. That was really good to see. I think, I'd like to see more of that. That is actually fantastic, because then you get to see an actual discussion breaking out there as well. And sometimes I think to myself, you could actually do a video just on those. But what it might well be, I'm just thinking in terms of the mailbox, as at the moment Blizzard aren't really telling us about anything to do with Legion. It's almost like Legion's finished. We know it hasn't quite. We know there's still some story to be told in Legion before even the pre-expansion patch, but we don't know what it is. We have no clues about that. We know about some things that are coming, but we don't know, is that just the pre-expansion patch? Is it the post-expansion patch, in other words, the actual expansion? Or is it stuff that is supposed to be for Legion? No idea. And increasingly, we're finding more and more out about Battle for Azeroth. So inevitably, a lot of the comments are going, and my videos, of course, are going to be on more of that sort of content. So it might well be that there are times when I do mailboxes where there would be spoilers in it. I will, of course, indicate those. So just get that out of the way. So let's go through a few comments here. So first one was on class buffs. So I'm not a fan of the class buffs. I sort of explained why there. We don't know exactly how they're going to pan out as it goes through, but even just the concept of them. But someone said here, good points, but Blizzard hasn't said too much about them. This is certainly true. Maybe they will all be available from professions, then it really does not matter, and these buffs are cool flavour. Now, I don't think so, in as much as the scrolls. Some people said about, being available in scrolls, but the scrolls, it's the same as with the drums for heroism. They're never as good. They're not actually as good, which means they're no substitute at all. You'd always prefer to get that particular class in. And we also know that Blizzard, Ian Hazacosta specifically said, when getting a group together, he was talking about it from the point of view of a pug, but, in terms of this line of thinking, it applies equally in a guild. And you don't have a particular class in that group, then you'd favour that one. I think he specifically gave the example of, you've got one spot to fill, and there's like a hunter and a warlock and whatever else, and you didn't have a hunter in the group, but you had everything else, then he wants you to pick the hunter. Doesn't matter if the hunter's a load of rubbish. Doesn't matter about that. He wants you to pick the hunter. So everything is going to be linked to the idea that you have one of each thing, which sounds fair. It sounds really inclusive. But my argument is, the problem is then that disadvantages someone who is good, who happens to play an extremely popular class. But anyway, in terms of this idea about flavour, anything that has an effect on gameplay is not flavour. It's all there is to it. It never is. Even sometimes, and some people will say, they'll use phrases, there's going to be one later on in this video as well about, anyone outside the top 50 doesn't need this, this and this. It's not always true, by the way. But it makes no difference even if it is true, because the perception will still be there. All right? Even much lower down, only a fool is going to say, there's no one in any position in progress who's going to say, it doesn't matter what we bring, we'll just bring 20 random people, or 25 random people, whatever it depends on whether it's normal, heroic, or whether it's a dungeon, just 5 random people for that. Makes no difference. You always want to take what you think is the best you can get. Everyone wants the path of least resistance. It's just human nature. We want to take the easiest route to something. Even when we want to do challenging content, we don't want to make it artificially harder than it needs to be. So everyone will always try to get the best out of any of their assets. So anything that affects gameplay, we know has an effect. We can see that from racials. We can see that from utility. No one really chooses classes to bring along based on, this one does loads more DPS. I mean, that sometimes was said in past years. It's not really said anymore because it's not really valid. What matters is how much effective DPS or healing someone can do, but more specifically, what utility do they bring? All right. The reason, for example, even though I've come across and raided with 2 very good, very strong Mistweaver monks this expansion, nonetheless, for the average Mistweaver monk against the average player of other healing classes, the Mistweaver Monk tends to fall down. Not because it can't do the healing, not because it can't throw out the output, but because of the utility is not as strong. It's as simple as that. And it applies to DPS, it applies to healers, it applies to tanks. So the utility is actually the really strong thing there. So there is no such thing that is just nice flavour, class, fantasy, anything like that. If it has an effect on gameplay, then it has an effect on whether or not you are chosen for a group. And sometimes you'll get, you know, it might benefit some people who are not actually that good, but they play a class that is in high demand, and it will disadvantage someone who may be better, but playing a class that's in much lower demand. Now, Blizzard are okay with that. In fact, Blizzard actively want to encourage that. My attitude is one that doesn't present a level playing field for everyone. That's almost like an inequitable society, which is something I'm very much against. But that's my view on that one. On to the next one. It says, I just want one thing after Alliance will capture Lordaeron, which, you know, is not really in spoiler territory because we know the siege takes place. I'm only going to go in the cinematic. We've all seen the cinematic. As far as I'm concerned, that's in. So a scene where Alliance leaders, from human kingdoms at least, although I think there's only one human kingdom left. Well, I suppose it's Kulturas now. Give their honours to the last true king of Lordaeron, King Tyrannus Menethil II. It wouldn't surprise me if something like that happened. I don't know what state Lordaeron's going to be in after the siege. We've got no inkling of that from the Battle for Azeroth Alpha. When you go into the old world in BFA, it's all set up as it is now in Legion. In fact, even before in Legion, because if you go to Silithus, it isn't post-sword and it's not during sword. It's as Silithus was before the sword appeared there when you kill Argus. So, yeah, it's... But, I mean, obviously the tomb of King Menethus is in... what did I just call him there? Tyrannus, I meant. I called him Menethil. I don't know what I called him. Anyway, Menethil. He is in Undercity. His tomb's there. It is quite possible that, although the area might be a little bit more ruined than it already is, that the tomb will still remain there. It wouldn't surprise me. You know how they are when after a major event there's a big cinematic. It wouldn't surprise me if there were a cinematic there with all the Alliance leaders all gathered around that area to give, you know, Anduin to give some speech or something like that. So I can absolutely see something like that happening, that it becomes a focal point for that cinematic. Quite excited to see that cinematic, actually. Then the next one, it says, I think the real problem lies in this: we must have the ideal comp mentality. In many cases, bring the player, not the class, would actually be the smart thing to do, assuming you're not in a world top 50 guild. So there's that sort of comment there, where everyone plays near perfectly. For example, my guild made sure all of our locks and no more than 3 melee were in for Mythic Coven on the first 2 kills, but most of our best raiders are melee. Since then, we haven't had the attendance to bench on the melee. As a result, we one-shot it on 2 occasions, once with 5, 4, and once with 5. The thing is, what your argument there is that on re-kills you killed it there. The issue is this. The quicker you can kill a boss, so let's say the first week of Mythic opens, you're a Mythic Raider. So the first week opens, but the same thing applies equally to Heroic and Normal on their progression. The first week of it opens. How many bosses you kill in that first week has a tangible effect on how well you're doing the second week. Now, to give an example, in the guild I was in last, and we did Tomb of Sargeras, on the first week we killed 3 bosses. We almost killed Sisters. On our last pull of the week, we got it down to sub 10%. And in fact, it wasn't sub 10% and crawling to it with loads of people dead. There were loads of people alive. Then someone did something stupid, or more likely 2 or 3 people, and we ended up dying to excessive buff stacking, or debuff stacking rather. And we wiped, and that was it. That was all there was to it. But, you know, if those people hadn't had a rush of blood and just played the mechanics, carried on with the mechanics, never mind the percentage, no rush of blood to try and go to the sprint to the finish, we would have killed it. Now, does it really make... And we killed it fairly quickly on the second week, so does it make much difference whether you kill it right at the end of the first week or towards the start of the second? Yes, it does. Because in that first week, we missed out on all that gear that it could drop. And that has a knock-on effect. So that then impacts, especially towards the start, because those upgrades are almost all going to go fly off the shelf. Now we're in a situation where it's only really going to be taken if it's Warforged or Titanforged. For main spec, at any rate. So, but in the start, it's really important. So you can get yourself to a situation, if you've got that initial start off the blocks and you've got, and again, that gear coming in, and you're learning the classes really well, the fights really well, sorry, then you can have a situation where you can do it with a less easy comp. So, for example, when we killed Coven, we had 7 melee. Okay, that's a lot. And we took a long time to kill it as a result. If we'd have had 3 Warlocks, we'd have killed it a hell of a lot quicker. A hell of a lot. We had 1. We had 1 Warlock and 1 Shadow Priest, and then the Shadow Priest left, and we had 1 Warlock then for rekills. Now, the rekills happened still more quickly, because we knew then we'd done the fight, we'd progressed on the fight. The problem is when you're progressing on a fight with a very far from ideal composition, then you're learning not just how to deal with the fight, but how to deal with the fact that you haven't got a good composition for it. And everything is just more difficult because you will wipe more, have silly wipes more often because of the pressure on people. Sometimes people, whenever someone does something that causes a wipe or a few people cause a wipe, there's always some fault there. You can always sort of point at them and go, well, you shouldn't have done that. But sometimes when the composition is not very good, the pressure on them is much greater. The margin for error is much smaller. So it's easier to step out of it. I mean, there's always a mistake made when it happens. But it is going to happen more often. It doesn't matter how good a player you are. Everyone makes mistakes. This idea of near-perfect play doesn't really exist. What exists, if it did exist, then the argument would be completely flipped around. If people in the top 50 were playing near perfectly, they wouldn't worry about the composition. The fact is they have to, because it does matter, and it matters for everyone. And although the further down the progress curve you go, the player skill counts for sometimes more than the class. Because obviously, let's say you've got 2 classes, A and B. A is really good for a particular fight, and B is absolutely torrid. There's no such thing, by the way, as a torrid class for any fight these days. But let's say it doesn't bring anything useful. That's as bad as it can get these days. And sometimes that's bad enough. And Class A brings all the bells and whistles. And let's say Class A is played by someone who's not very good in your guild, and they will frequently make mistakes that wipe people. They'll get themselves killed all the time, therefore using up the battle reses. They'll drop other people in it. They'll do things that get other people killed, all that sort of things. You know, an Argus with the Rage, they just run around everyone like a headless chicken. Extreme example, but that sort of thing. Whereas Class B, not ideal, but played by someone who never puts a foot wrong, or almost never puts a foot wrong. When they do, no one notices anyway, because everyone else has cocked up more anyway. They get the best out of their class, all the rest of it. That sort of situation is much more likely the further you go down. So it matters less. But that doesn't mean to say it doesn't matter at all. If always you've got 2 people of equal ability, then you still bring the Class A if you can. You just need to be a bit more aware of what is that balance between player skill and class skill. Whereas what is true to say is much higher. And top 50 is very arbitrary, by the way. I mean, why not top 48 or top 30? But, the top section, should we say. The player skill is likely to be much more compact because everyone will be able to play their class pretty well. And, in fact, not just their class, but probably several other classes as well, particularly at the very top end. And that's how it is there. But even much lower down, you still always want to bring the best composition because you want to give yourself an easier time as possible. No one's going to turn around and say, on, say, Fallen Avatar, Mythic Fallen Avatar, that you were able to, not bring anyone who could solo soak. It's like, oh, well, we don't need to take any rogues because, we're in world 1000th place. No, you still want to take loads of rogues. You'd have a much easier time of it if you took loads of rogues. It's just that you don't have to. You can do it with other things. More difficult, that's all. But it's possible. But the fact that it's more difficult means you're going to have more wipes as a result of it. So it always matters. It always matters. And that's why it's always important. There's this argument about, it doesn't matter if they make some classes better than others because beyond the top, like 0.1% or something, it doesn't matter. It does matter. And even if it didn't matter, the perception would still be there. But it actually does matter. Because you want to give yourself as good an easier time as possible on any fight. Next one. Here's to do with Zandalari Paladins. So this was the idea, very, very minor, but there's a little bit of a sentence in there that suggests that the Zandalari Paladins, they're not called Paladins, they're called Prelates, but it means the same thing. They're holy warriors devoted to, using the light and stuff like that. And there's a storyline in BFA which basically cuts them off. They can't use the light anymore. Very, very minor. But it's a key theme within a particular story arc. And someone was saying this is, I thought the story was pretty much here is why we don't have any more Zandalari Paladins, because we can't make others anymore. It's over, we're screwed up. That is actually one interpretation of that storyline, but it's not my interpretation. The reason is, here's the thing. So at the moment, as far as we can tell, and we can't tell for certain, Blizzard haven't said what class of Zandalari trolls are going to be. We can't play Zandalari trolls in the BFA. All we're getting this is from data mine stuff. That's all. And Blizzard are always very quick to say, with data mine stuff, sometimes there's stuff in there that is not going to make it. They change their mind, all that sort of thing. So we don't know what classes. But from the data mining, it appears there's not going to be Zandalari Paladins. Now, I mean, I was someone when the idea was even, suggested, went, no. But no, I'm not a Horde player, so it doesn't matter to me. But there's a lot of people want that. Now, given that a lot of people want Zandalari Paladins to be a thing, if they weren't going to be, if I were Blizzard, I wouldn't put a storyline in explaining why there's not going to be, because that's just rubbing salt into the wound. It's like you're going to come up with a whole story arc just to explain why we're not allowing Zandalari Paladins. It's a bit like taking someone's hopes and dreams, and instead of just saying, you can't have this, it's like dropping it on the floor and then stomping up and down on it a few times. It's unnecessarily cruel. So I actually think the fact that they've put anything in the game at all to even talk about it is a bit of an indicator of, okay, you've lost access to the light, you're all sad now. Along comes Lady Liadrin and goes, I might be able to show you another path to the light. But anyway, that's my view. We won't know until Blizzard do it. And as I say, either way, I don't think we'll know even when this thing goes live. I think this is intended for later. So next one, again, gameplay-wise, it says, I'm also, story-wise, I'm also very interested in the Vol'jin Sylvanas story in BFA. I think there has to be a good explanation behind Sylvanas as war chief, because Vol'jin didn't need to die at the Broken Shore. It could have been Bane or Thrall. No, we never kill Thrall. Who died instead, or no one. The only reason I can see for Blizzard killing Vol'jin is to allow for Sylvanas to become war chief, which is a deliberate decision made by Blizzard, so I can only assume they have a good reason behind it and not some terrible nonsense explanation. At least I hope. I agree with that 100%. I think you're quite right. Vol'jin didn't need to die. They could have kept him as the war chief quite easily. It had no impact on the Legion story. Sylvanas didn't need to be war chief to do the stuff she was doing in Legion. Obviously, her main story in Legion is in Stormheim and trying to get more Valkyr. She could have done that as simply leader of the Forsaken, as just, in her own right, able to lead her own campaign of Undead. So she didn't need to be war chief for that. She didn't need to be war chief for anything in Legion at all. So the reason for her being war chief must be something, because we know they say all the time that they, with their story arcs, they can span several expansions, and some storylines they work out that are intended to take like 6 years or so. So absolutely, I think they have a particular reason in mind that has nothing to do with Legion and may well have everything to do with Battle for Azeroth. So I quite agree with that. I do also think that, there will be an explanation in Battle for Azeroth, because as we know, Thrall is supposed to be taking the ashes of Vol'jin to the Zandalari. So there is going to be something there. We haven't seen it yet in the alpha. But there's surely going to be some explanation there. Whether it'll be a good one or not, I don't know. But I think that there will be a credible one there. Because there has to be. Because as you say there, Vol'jin didn't need to die. Bane could have died easily. I mean, who cares about Bane? But as you also say, no one needed to die. It could just have been... I mean, I didn't really accept the whole thing in the first place of them disappearing. But, everyone was insistent. No, the idea was that they got completely cut off. Loads of Legion demons spawning in. They had to escape, otherwise they were completely dead. They could have, that assessment could have been made without anyone being killed. And even with Vol'jin being injured, or even badly injured, well, we have healers. So as I say, and as we reiterate, there was no need for him to die. He could have just said, oh, thanks very much for saving the Horde. Good job, Sylvanas. Next one. Tauren Paladin is best Paladin. No. Right, next one. Useless talent in raids can be used for Mythic Plus or PvP. So this is really from a rep one I did, but applies equally to others. So the idea of a talent being one where you would never use it in a raid, but potentially being useful in, say, Mythic Plus or something like that, is okay. I'm okay with that. For PvP, I would disagree a little bit though, because there are PvP talents. I don't know where they are in BFA actually, I have to say, because in the alpha at the moment I don't have any PvP talents, and I know they don't in Legion. They don't appear until you actually somehow engage in PvP, and then they suddenly appear. But I did have such an event this weekend when I was in the alpha. You know, I accidentally picked on some Alliance NPCs. I didn't mean to. Well, it's actually more true to say they picked on me. I just approached them in a friendly manner and they tried to beat me up. But nonetheless, I got the thing that said, oh, PvP stuff has happened to you, which normally prompts the honour talents and didn't. So I don't actually know where they are in the alpha. I assume they're still going to be there because they're actually quite a good idea. But what I would say is if a talent was only going to be of use in PvP, like only, then it should be a PvP talent. But I agree with the notion that you might have a talent that realistically in a raid doesn't become useful, but does in Mythic Plus. That being said, I think it's better if it can be useful in different ones. Otherwise, you run the risk of being in a situation where you use this set of talents for raids, this set of talents for dungeons, and there's no real thought over them depending on circumstances or even the type of dungeon or the affix or anything like that. I'm not saying I'm necessarily a massive fan of changing talents on a regular basis, but it does seem silly to always have the same ones that cover every situation, which is the same for me. It's not the same for all classes and specs, I understand. It's the same for me at the moment. So there you go. Right, on to the next one. It says, this was to do with the 15k subscriber special I did on some of my favourite items that I still have from vanilla. And one person here caught my eye saying, my favourite is still my Death's Bargain, the healing shield from original Nax. Yes, I still have that as well. There it is. That's what it looks like. It's obviously it doesn't go with that transmog. I did actually create, because I used it a little while ago. I think in MOP I created my protection paladin set, and I created a transmog to go with it, to go around it, which I quite liked. But yeah, the thing I like most, well, there's two for me personally. I mean, you know, I almost included it in my top 10, by the way. I almost included it, but not quite. Has a soft spot for me. First of all, yes, it is super unique as a piece of equipment. Most pieces of equipment from vanilla now, there's a reskin of it. There's another version you can get of it. It might be a recolor, but at least it's there. Death's Bargain is, I'm not sure about unique, but very unusual in that there has never been another one since. Ironically, there was in MOP, I think in Scholarmance, there's a shield you can get there that has the same icon in your bags, but it doesn't actually look the same when you're wearing it. So yes, as, you know, as far as I know, there is nothing else that looks like this. Some people I know don't like the look of it. They just think it looks bad. But, well, whether it looks bad or not, it's unique. Everyone likes unique. Unique is good. But the other reason is, for me, I used it for such a long time. I got it in Nax. And so I used it all the way through the rest of vanilla, which, okay, didn't have that much longer to run. But even in TBC, I used it for healing for quite a long time. Because healing shields were a bit thin on the ground. I didn't actually replace it as a healing shield until Black Temple. Was it second? I think Supremus dropped a better one. That was the first time I replaced it. And by then I was actually a Ret main anyway. So, you know, I healed every now and then. So I didn't actually use it that much either. So basically, it was not only the healing shield I used for the longest amount of time. It was, in theory, my last healing shield, because it was the healing shield I was using when I was last a Holy Paladin main. So it has a special, you know, spot in my heart there, but it just wasn't quite in my top 10. I have so many items from vanilla, but I do still keep that, even though I don't now need to, because I can just transmog it. But I won't get rid of it because you can't get it anymore. I'm not one for getting rid of anything in real life or in game that you can't get anymore. And that's Blizzard's fault. You know, it's Blizzard's fault my bank is full because they remove content that stops you getting these very nice things. At the same time, it helps it remain more special. And then the last one is a bit of a strange one here. This was not really to do with WoW, but it was sort of... So what I've been doing recently is putting posts on the official forums to try and get some engagement on both NA and EU, because I've got an NA account now, which means I can post on both. Sometimes it is difficult, though. It's really weird. Sometimes it won't let me log in on one if I'm on another, or weird. But eventually, if I'm patient, it'll let me post on both. And I was saying that actually Blizzard should be, you know, it's important that as well as criticising the things we don't like, that we should also praise them for the things we do. And I don't just mean out of manners. I mean just so that they don't get rid of it. Because remember, don't take for granted that anything that's currently in the alpha will stay there. They might actually think, oh, no, it's not working. Whereas you might be thinking, no, it's brilliant, keep it. And you're just not saying that because you're focusing on stuff to criticise. So I was trying to say, wouldn't it be nice just to say thank you for things like this? I even sent them a pack. I found somewhere in California that accepted payments from like overseas, and sent them like a pack of like brownies and muffins and cookies and stuff as a thank you. And then someone said here, so about the praising, at the year of 7, so when you're 7 years old, you have gotten half the praises you will get your whole life. I've never come across that before, but it is probably believable, isn't it? Isn't it sad? Isn't that sad? Because we're taught, aren't we, as we grow up, we are taught to say thank you, please and thank you, remember our manners. So when someone does something, you'll thank you. And but we're not actually taught to praise people, are we? You know, so we're quick to criticise, we're not really quick to praise. It is quite sad, because I know as a teacher, for example, one of the things you're taught, and teacher training, one of the big things you're taught in teacher training is to understand this, to understand that actually it's important not just to correct people where they go wrong, but you've got to, you know, praise people when they go right. And as a teacher, you're always well aware, you know, you sometimes get students so they basically don't get anything right. So it's very difficult to praise them. You have to praise them for the effort in that particular case. But then you get some students who don't try either. And that's very difficult. So what happens is, whenever they do anything even remotely good, you have to be all over it. Oh, well done. This is fantastic. Wow. Blah, blah, blah. Because you are looking for that. Every lesson, you want to praise every student at least once. You want to be able to say, well done at least once. And that's a real big thing in teaching. But the fact that you have to be taught this and told to do this and given this as practice, yeah, it does. It rings true, doesn't it, that we just don't do it habitually. Big shame, big shame. I think there's two things that we do naturally when we're very young and we're sort of taught out of it. And one of them is praising when someone does something we like. We're really quick to criticise when they don't, but praising when someone does something we like, we're pretty bad at. And the other one is giving up too easily. You know, too many of us just... And it's like we're taught, you know, when you're like 1, 2 years old, you don't give up on anything. Do you? You don't. You're taught to give up. You're taught to accept failure, which is also a big shame. But anyway, on that sullen note, that's the mailbox for this week. As I say, future ones I'll have a little think as we start to get more and more comments that are more likely to be related to BFA. I may swing them, or at least every now and then, or maybe on a more regular basis, to being much more BFA related, in which case there may be spoilers, because we inevitably may have to talk about gameplay. But and might be the odd video that's a little bit spoilerish as well. Like today I brought one out. Very minor spoilers, but, you know, spoilers nonetheless. There's another one if I get time to do it tomorrow that hopefully will come out tomorrow, which also will be spoilers, and we'll have to have... I'm not going to put spoiler tags in everything, by the way. If I say a video is to do with Battle for Azeroth, you're going to assume it's to do with spoilers. But hopefully, you know, Blizzard will say something about Legion at some point, and we can do a bit of a mixture, like 1 week on, 1 week off, something like that. That would be interesting. So let me know what you think below. Of course, as always, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.